Hi, everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm here today with Derek Fielder.
Mhm.
Derek J. Fielder is a husband, father, and on top of that, a creative artist, a conversationalist, and writer of story and song from Northern California. He explores the phenomenological symbolic worldview through interviews and letters. Derek is a contributor for the Symbolic World. He's also very active on his Substack, which is derekjfielder.substack.com. And I'll also link his own YouTube channel in the comment section when this is published. But Derek, I just wanted to say hi and thank you for coming on to the show. I know that you might have had a little bit of a journey to get here, obviously, being in the car. So I really do appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, no, it's a real privilege to connect. I've enjoyed some of your conversations so far, and glad that I get to be a part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, ditto, man. I really enjoy what you have on your site, and like I said, and even our off-air conversation and our emails, I've been a fan of your work for a little bit now. So, just real pleasure and honor for you to come on. So, this channel, Just with Joe, is it's a channel dedicated to having interesting thinkers come on in the fields of psychology, philosophy, theology, culture in general. And I have the guest explain the gist of their intellectual project. The reason I do this is really because, and you know how big the YouTube world is, so it could be a little, inundating, might be the best word, to try to just grip the thousands of thinkers on YouTube, specifically in this realm of YouTube. So with that being said, I would love to start for you just to take a little bit and explain what's the gist of your creative or your intellectual project.
Yeah, I love the question. Love the show. I'd have to say you asked this at a very interesting time because for the last few years I've been active on the Symbolic World or this little corner of the internet. With people like J.P. Marceau and Jonathan Pageau, Mathieu Pageau, the writers and all of the wonderful contributors to the blog of the Symbolic World. But I've also been writing letters, or I guess the popular term nowadays is newsletters,
I like
on
letters
Substack for the last couple of years, which has been a real delight, kind of connecting with people at a more vulnerable or personal level. And then, but I find that my intellectual gist is that I am deep down a storyteller. And that's like my calling. But for the last couple of years, I have not been active in that. And I can explain why in a little bit.
Sure.
So in a sense, my gist is shifted from being an explorer of how to understand reality and how to see things holistically, properly, to recognize patterns, whether that's anywhere from sci-fi films all the way to stories in the Bible or culture. And then really using conversations and podcasts to unpack this, also writing essays, whether it's in, the realm of sports or football or, even film or anything like that. Anything where I see like an insightful pattern that can really unlock how people can see the deeper meaning in things. I've been using this last couple of years, more of like a training ground with other people to help develop my worldview, because I've been given stories, like very amazing, unique stories and experiences earlier in my life, but I just didn't have the right foundation, the right framework to tell that. And now, after a couple of years, gosh, maybe like 3 or 4 years now, of engaging in the symbolic world and that frame of thought and seeing the world in such a beautiful, beautiful way, that I finally have built that foundation that I was seeking to now I feel like I'm shifting from really being someone that's like learning and describing and exploring uh, other people's work to now it's being time where I'm feeling more of that conviction that's it's time to write out these stories, to finish these songs and to get my original stuff out there.
Wow. That's beautiful. There's I wrote down so many notes, even just through that gist, because there's so much to unpack here. And I do want to say first and foremost that I appreciate the vulnerability, and why I appreciate the vulnerability is this. I think And I've noticed this too, and it's funny, since I started this channel, people who are watching this, right? And I know you have, approximately maybe like in the thousands watching, some of your videos. So a good amount of people. And for those people on the other side of the laptop, they think, oh man, this guy has it down. Or this guy might have been, oh man, this guy his training period per se might have been in his teens, or might have been in his undergrad, right? Might have been in his early 20s. And maybe they get discouraged. They go, oh, I can't do this, right? How can I do this if I don't know exactly what to say? But I love that you admitted that, you've taken a couple years recently to, as you said, to kind of like go into your inner monk almost, and try to discern, and try to not isolate yourself. Obviously you're not isolated, but isolating yourself in a way to really try to figure out, as you described, what is your gist, what is your project, what is your meaning and purpose. You have been active for years now on the internet, and I love that you care so much about the meaning of your work, that you have taken the time to discern, well, what is the work that I'm supposed to be doing? And I love this. I've been doing a lot of thinking, actually. So Jonathan Pageau had Luke Burgess on his channel recently to talk about mimetic desire. And so, little spoiler alert, I actually, real quick, for everyone who's watching, Luke Burgess has agreed to come on the show, my show.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I don't know when that's going to take place, sometime in hopefully early February, but unbracket. Mimetic desire, as he says, right? A lot of times we, whether that's like in the business world or even in the creative world, when we accomplish something big, we usually still have that kind of sense, that blanket of depression that still, as I said, blankets over us, and we are so confused. Well, why is this? I just sold a business. I just got the job I wanted. I just signed my contract and I'm going to be making $100,000 a year, or I just finished this book. I just got successful on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter. And, I think according to, more the Girardian notion of this is that, well, because it's mimetic desire, because we're just copying the mediator, right? We don't necessarily care about the object. We care more about the mediator. And I think it's kind of cool that you maybe, and I might be assuming too much, but it seems like you've gone through this process. It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to just copy the mediator, or do you want to actually figure out what is it that I desire, and well, who is it that I actually want to copy, because copying them will lead to some greater good. And it sounds like you took a period of time to do this, and I just really respect that. So I just want to say that off the bat.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. A lot of people don't think about that. They just kind of fall into it. And you got to pick your mediators carefully.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Because, like once I came across Jonathan Pageau's work, it clicked right away for me.
Sure.
And I've had some good discussions recently where I realized I took a lot for granted. For example, I've been playing the piano since I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
And so I know Socrates, Plato talks about this, where the best education, or the first primary education, is that of music. And I think it's because you spend so much time in like the realm of pattern of reality. It's like right when things start to descend from the unseen realm of patterns, and then they start to take form, it's like you're playing in that area. And so you can see movement, you can see consistencies, you can see tensions and resolutions, and you're kind of playing with that before it actually materializes in anything. Because, can you hold a song?
Right.
No, I mean, like, okay, so technically people could get scientific and say like, oh, there's vibrations and there's frequencies and all that, but like,
well, you can reduce anything.
Purposes, we don't see frequencies,
right?
We don't, but our soul interacts with it. And so I've been developing those skills, as if someone were to learn another language fluently for my whole life. And so that's developed a lot of intuitions that I to the point where I don't think about them,
Yeah.
And so then I've also been studying and reading and been familiar with the biblical stories, which are densely packed with so many different layers of understanding. I mean, they're poetic, like Cormac Jones and his Cosmic Chiasmus article that he wrote for the Symbolic World.
Yeah,
Just it takes it to the next level. It's right up there with Mathieu Peugeot's book, Language of Creation, which
sure.
opens up and shows the symbolism and how you could see fractals and see the Bible as just, again, it just unlocks what those stories have in stored. And then you read like Alistair Roberts. I had a great talk with him. He has an excellent book called Echoes of Exodus,
Mm.
which shows that you could read the Bible musically. And so you could see things in terms of motif, right? You could see like little mini versions of the theme and the most irreducible point. And then you could see it like branch out like a great symphony with different movements upon that same theme. So like there's just, I mean, those are three layers. Like that's three realms of three layers of seeing things. It's kind of like red, blue, and yellow,
Yeah,
right? But then you find out, oh my gosh, there's other animals that have more spectrums of color they can see,
yeah.
right? Then what is I think it's a seahorse has like 24 or something like
Oh,
that.
okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So like what would that be like, you know? But like so I guess the question that I've been asking a lot is like, what do I bring to this little corner of the internet, like Paul
Sure.
Vanderglay talked about with you? And then or the Symbolic World blog, you know, these networks of people that are on primarily online, some in
Yeah,
person, uh, but just like what do I bring, you know? Because I found myself like typically what happens is I totally have that mediator or a mentor, or I see something and I think I can do that,
yeah,
or
right.
I can learn what it takes to do that, but
Yeah,
I want to do that. So you start replicating. And so
yeah,
you see like, you know, like some of my stuff is pretty similar to Jonathan Peugeot.
sure.
But it's kind of like to use a football comparison, like Vince Lombardi, right? Coach Red was the coach that he stayed under over at oh, what was it, Army or Navy. He was a he
Oh,
was a
yeah.
yeah,
Can't
so he
remember the
was a
year.
coordinator. He wasn't the head coach for most of his career.
Yeah,
Well into his 40s is when he finally became the head coach of the Packers. And so he said like in his mind he was like, well, of course my team's going to look a lot like Coach
yeah,
Red's team. It's because
exactly.
I'm in his school. I'm in a school.
Yes,
That's what I study from. So that's what
yes,
it's going to look like,
yes,
you know? And so,
yes. No, it's like this. Yeah, the coaching trees. You hear this all the time. You hear again to just do the whole sports analogy. Yeah, you hear about coaching trees. Specifically, you hear more about it in the NFL, right? So you have like your founding fathers, a Lombardi, a Tom Landry, guys like those. Oh, I'm forgetting the guy, but the first coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, his name's escaping me, but you have these fundamental players, right? The first people, the first things, if you want to say that. And then you branch out, right? And it's like, yeah, everyone is going to, in a way, replicate Lombardi, right? And you can track it even now. Like, you see Kyle Shanahan on the Niners, right?
mhm.
Obviously influenced by his father. His father, Mike Shanahan, obviously influenced by so and so to so and
I
so.
hate the Niners, but I love their coach. He's the
Yeah,
best
right.
coach. Oh,
The
man.
Browns had Kyle Shanahan for a little bit as the OC.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we still sucked, but no, he's a
Yeah.
he's a great coach and a great OC, great mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so exactly, you see this, and going back to what we were talking about before. Well, here's the deal, and this is like I think a good message for this little corner of the internet is that you know it's only through the conversations that you have with other people that I think is the truest way to actualize your thought or to
Mhm.
actualize like
Good.
what it is that you are supposed to be doing, right? So this is why this corner has picked up steam and why it's so conversational. It's just because it's through the conversation that we get to know our own being more, and I think that's a really beautiful thing because it ties in this whole like co-creating of reality type of thing, and I think it's really beautiful. And it's all about, as you said before, picking the right models, right? So
Mhm.
like if you were to, again, if I'll go back to Girard, and if you're if we're to just like look at in that lens, well, like, yeah, all of our desires are going to be a copycat game. And that's fine.
Mhm.
Like that's fine. But it's like, who are you going to copycat, right?
Mhm.
Are you going to copycat, I don't know, are you going to copycat just random TikTokers who have billions of followers? Many do, right? Or are
Mhm.
you going to copycat, well, is like you said, like, are you going to copycat a guy like Jonathan? So
Mhm.
there's something more true and better about copying someone like Jonathan, right? Because ultimately, this brings you up a different, like, it's separate ladders, right? So like you can take the more secular approach, or you can take the more religious approach. Well, copying the more religious approach is ultimately going to reach you to the pinnacle of, you're just copycatting Christ, right? Which is something that we should be doing.
Yeah,
Uh,
ideally.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
like Paul said, is like imitate me just as I
Yes.
imitate Christ. So if that ladder is intact, then you have that ladder to heaven, to the highest of high. But then there's also, it's not like it's like a direct copy. To use music, it's like you look at someone like Jimi Hendrix, a
Sure.
lot of his greatest hits are covers, typically
Yeah.
Dylan covers. He loved Dylan. He considered himself a student of Dylan, but the way he played his songs was very Hendrix,
Yes.
you
No,
know?
that is such a good, oh, I love that, actually. That's a good comparison. And it's so true. Yeah, let's not discount individuality though over here. Let's not discount. I mean, we are individuals, right? So like we do bring our own unique set of circumstances and set of talents and set of skills. That's true. But it's like knowing the rules. I think it's like knowing the rules, knowing that you are indebted, right, to some other individual that you look up to. And then using your own skills and talents, having those three things in mind, mixing them together to create a good product that ultimately, right, is and maybe it's, and this is a desire too, right, ultimately to help influence others in a positive way, in a non-egotistical positive way.
Yeah.
And so you said that you do work a lot with the Peugeots, and on your channel I've seen you do some really great landscape interviews. I'll call them, because
Mm, nice.
both you and Mathieu are outside. So yeah, you've been doing a lot of interviews with him, and I know it seems like you have been not producing them, but premiering them kind of in little chunks and pieces. So I was
Oh,
wondering
yes.
if you can give my viewers a little glimpse into what those conversations have been about, and maybe what you have learned, and what have you discovered during those conversations.
Yeah. So I've had a couple with Jonathan, and then one with Matthew recently. And as far as the chunks go, I mean, those are like 5 to 10 minute, or actually a couple of them are even less than 1 minute. Uh, just little sound bites and clips
Yeah.
um, that can really stand by themselves, but also encourage people to watch the full interview. And I found, and I'm experimenting. I'm still a beginner in a lot of ways, especially with the technical stuff. But um, what I what you see on the back end like with YouTube videos or podcast is you see this graph of like viewership, and it usually starts out like peak viewership, and then after a matter of
Oh
seconds,
yeah.
you see this descent. And for someone who knows that the content itself is really good, edifying, enchanting, they can learn a lot. And especially with the long form conversations where you really don't start warming up until like 30 minutes in.
Of course.
And then you see like 30% of the people are still tuned in by the hour mark. And you're like,
Yeah. No, I
oh,
know.
I feel so bad. I feel so bad they're missing out.
Yes.
And like genuinely, like this could change someone's life if they heard it. They could start seeing the world in a way that's a healthy environment, because we're products of our environment. So if we don't see the environment, then we'll just embed ourselves into bad ones, and it's
Yeah.
like, so like deep down, like that's my biggest heart, is because like that's the thing that's helped me the most. And so I want to help people along in that regard. It motivates me. But with the clips, is I started with the back end, and it was like the Samson and David.
Yes.
Like I started with the ones that took place after the hour mark, and I'm just pulling them out. They
Very good.
stand
Yeah.
well by themselves, and I clipped that. And it works because I work full time at a community nonprofit. And so sometimes you just got to go with works, and you got to go with what you got. That's why I'm recording in a parking lot at the grocery store, because you gotta make it happen. So I apologize if that's a distraction for some of the viewers.
No, I love it. And
And I'm hoping that
they
there
will
isn't
too.
anybody making any faces behind me. But yeah, so that's the clips part. And what was it like? I mean, like the Peugeot brothers, or I like better to say the Brothers Pageau.
I like that.
I mean, they're the real deal. Like they really want to help people. They just have different interesting ways of going about it. Mathieu is probably the most mysterious and fascinating person I have ever come to know.
Yeah, he has a good look.
Yes.
Good old beard,
Yes.
probably.
Good life, good look.
Yeah,
He's mysterious in the truest sense of the word, but yet he's friendly, and he's like someone you want to know. You're
sure.
not terrified by him. But he can be a little bit elusive sometimes.
Yeah.
Which, I did a video reviewing his book, and in one of those videos, I think I brought up a really good insight that I hope people would find encouraging. It's, if you look at the brothers, Peugeot is like the familiar teacher, the one that you see day in and day out. He's very faithful in publishing a video or two a week, and you kind of grow accustomed to him. And then his brother comes out of nowhere after 2 years of taking time off, and he'll just publish a book. And then he'll do 2 interviews, and then he'll disappear. And then, like he said in the interview with me, he's like, well, I have something to say now, so I'm going to come into town. I'm going to leave the woods where I live in a yurt, come into town, hook up to internet, and have some conversations, publish the book, and then I'm going to go back to my yurt for the winter for the next however many years. But it's if you look at it symbolically, it kind of like take a couple steps back and look at the whole picture in terms of the symbolism that they're laying out. One is definitely the right hand, and one is the left hand. One is like Paul, one is like Peter, one
That's a
is
good one right
the
there. I like
priest in town, one is the prophet on the outskirts. It's really interesting. I don't know if they planned it out. It would be the greatest plan of the century, but that's how it's unfolded.
I love the Peter and Paul comparison. I mean, obviously they're nowhere near Peter and Paul, but like, I like the comparison of the different just the different models of behavior, right? And the different skills and talents. And that's really good. Yeah, so you yourself said that you're a storyteller, and I know with your work with the Peugeots, you do a lot, you occupy a lot of your mental bandwidth in the space of symbolic and patterned thinking. And so I've been trying to approach this question myself. When I'm on my computer and I'm reading a book, or when I'm watching a podcast, whatever, I can like almost like take a step back and have this like transcendent moment and say to myself, oh, okay, Joe, like this is how like you see the patterns in reality, like, or like this is how you see like pattern thinking or symbolic thinking in something like football, or in something like I don't know, even like doing work at a desk, right? I mean, that's one of Jonathan's main examples. He uses a lot of to explain multiplicity into unity, right? He uses the cup, and and or just even simple things, right, like that. So I can understand how a pattern reality and a symbolic reality within everyday reality exists. However, that's hard when I'm actually, at work, or when I'm at the grocery store,
Yep.
or when I'm playing with my kid, or when I'm having a conversation with my wife. And sometimes when I reflect upon my day, I go, man, I really wish I would have approached this situation, this mundane situation, more symbolically. I wish I would have approached this situation having a better pattern perspective. And this is really difficult. So it's really easy, like I said, to have this like third person, like transcendent notion of all this stuff. But it's really hard to live, for me, it's really hard to live out the day to day. And so I'm just curious, as like someone who's been working in this realm, someone who considers themselves a storyteller, and a storyteller is, I think, really the goal of every storyteller is to expose patterned realities, symbolic realities. Do you yourself see these mundane situations, driving to the grocery store, doing an interview, doing your job, taking a walk, planting a garden? Do you in real time understand the symbolic significance and the pattern significance within these things, or is that still a difficult endeavor for you?
Great question. This question is really driving Mr. Marceau right now, JP Marceau. He's doing like a podcast series called The Symbolism of Work. Or
I did not know. What's it called?
Check it out. Symbolism of Work, JP Marceau.
See, and really quick, and this is exactly why this space in the internet is important, because it's, these conversations that probably will facilitate other conversations with other people. So
it's like the swap meet of ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's driving him right now. And so it's a good question, because it's not just me that's really taken the last couple of years as like a learning space, a season of finding out things. We've been doing that together, but I think a lot of us are to that maturity of like, well, it has to look like something.
Exactly.
It has to come down to that concrete reality where you do stuff.
Yeah.
And it changes how you do stuff or how you see yourself doing stuff. So am I conscious of it? Sometimes. Much of the time, no, because you get into the momentum of the day.
Yeah.
Mathieu had some good comments, some surprising comments about work. And he said that manual labor, like you mentioned, gardening, great example, is very, very good for the intellectual.
Socrates even says this.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So it's not just music, it's also gardening.
Yeah,
right. But it's because it kind of changes the part of the mind that you use, right? Because you're not trying to solve problems in the same way of trying to understand things philosophically, right? You're not trying. You're allowing yourself to enter into that labor.
Yeah.
And and for me, it's critical. So I ride bikes, I garden, I do remodels on the house. These are things that my mind isn't the main character anymore. My hands are, my body is. And so that gives my brain, my mind, a little bit of a relaxing time. It's kind of like you go to a meeting, and it's different when you have to be the one facilitating it, to plan the event, to think through everything. It's different when you can just show up and just be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes, because I put in a lot of thought to things, and I'm very picky with what I allow myself to spend a lot of time with.
Yes.
So I'm kind of like my daughter in that sense, where if I find a good movie, I watch it a lot.
Okay.
So instead of watching 40 movies, I watch like 40 times.
Yeah.
So in my day-to-day life, I'm trying to do my best to be more intentional with coming up with maybe games, you could call it, or ways of like asking that question early in the day. How can I apply this in what I'm doing? Because I lead a small team. So, 7 people answer to me for direction of what we're going to be doing and how are we going to go about our day. I have to think like 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time. We're going to make sure that we have good work in front of us.
Yep.
So like there's other things too. I'm kind of on assignment from JP because he kind of called me out, and he's like, I want you to be more intentional about thinking about how you can not just discover, but actively come up with scenarios where you can use some of these things that you're learning in the symbolic world realm into your daily life.
Yeah.
And so like one of them, I can give you one of them.
Please.
Is like a coaching exercise, or like another word would be like case management for the social worker realm, where you sit down with a person and you try to help them just sort through their life, sort through what their purpose is, what they're needing to do. And so one of the techniques I realized that I use, that I employ, is teleological. right? You start with the end. And so I call it the 3-1-2 planning method. And people will recognize that have used this, where you make 3 columns and then you start at the third one. And it's like, where do you want to be?
Yep.
At the end of the year, where do you want to be? Okay. That's column number 3. So you start with that one. And then you go to number 1, assess, like, where are you at right now?
Yes.
Okay. And then the middle one is like, what's the journey? What are the practical things that we have to do in order to go from 1 to 3? So you start with 3, go to 1, go to 2.
That's lovely. And Derek, I don't know if you know this, because I forget exactly like what our email conversation was, but I'm also in the clinical mental health realm.
Oh,
yes. So
you know what I'm talking about then.
What's that?
So you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, but I smirk because I know exactly what you're talking about, but you put it in such a, I love how you like connected these two, like you bridged. And as myself, and I'm not a clinician quite yet. I will become a clinician later this year. And so, sorry about that. What I find interesting is how much like clinical mental health and interventions and intervention strategies, right? How they don't work unless the counselor themselves understand the pattern and the symbolic significance within the intervention, right? Because then you're just doing like workbook psychology, and I'm not a fan of workbook psychology. There needs to be, and that can be good, obviously, like working yourself through a workbook, but when these clinical mental health interventions are so important because they can dramatically shift your life for the better. They had that much power, but they could also dramatically shift your life for the worse, right? Again, that's how much power they have. It's important for the individual, I think, who is in charge of facilitating this intervention. Again, like you said, to know the patterns and to know the symbolic significance of the specific intervention. So I think counseling is one of the greatest. I think it's one of the greatest professions because, again, it employs so much symbology and so much pattern thinking within it, and I love it. It's and I also think it has very ancient roots. Again, something that I did not plan on talking about, but why not? I think it has very ancient roots. My favorite counseling relationship, and I think the counseling relationship that inspires me the most is the counseling relationship between Virgil and Dante. That is by far, in my opinion, the greatest mode and the greatest example of a counselor, of a high functioning counseling relationship. Here's why. So, well, and again, the symbology of it plays in so well. So, right, the goal for Dante and Virgil. So Dante is seeking. He's distressed, right? He's having this midlife crisis, quarter life, probably midlife crisis at that, given the relative expectancy of age. So he's having this midlife crisis, right? And to some degree, he is seeking out. So he wants to change, right? So there's, again, going back to anyone who knows what we're talking about, like the stages of change or the level of acceptance that you're going to bring out into the therapeutic relationship. So Dante wants to change. So Dante is actively coming to Virgil. He seeks him out in a way, right? And that's the only way that a good counseling relationship is going to work, is that the individual wants to change, right?
Yeah.
And Derek, you know that. The individual is going to want to change. It can't just be, Virgil just knocking on Dante's door and saying, "Hey, we got to pick it up." And that, and I'm sure you have so many examples of how difficult it is when the individual is we call ambivalent to change, to use kind of the lexicon in the counseling world. So, but no, Dante's accepting of it. So Dante's accepting of it, and Virgil, through a different series of scenes, right, helps him and intervenes on him so that he can quite literally go up different rungs of reality, right? To gain a more authentic self. That's another goal of counseling, right? I mean, you could hear that from any counselor, religious or secular, is that it's to help the client gain authenticity, right? And so what's more authentic than a beatific vision, right? So, and that's what Virgil is trying to help Dante do, but as I'm sure you know, Virgil cannot go up to heaven with Dante. I'm pretty sure that he abandons Dante abandons him somewhere in purgatory, in Purgatorio, right? And because, and what I think the symbolism in that is that, again, going back to the grounded in the model of counseling, is that the counselor is not able to make the client reach the desired goal. Ultimately, it is Dante. Ultimately, it is the client, the patient, who has to gain, or has to, what's the good word I'm looking for? Actualize that mental health goal ultimately by themselves, right? And Dante does that. And Dante does that obviously through other, a whole other slew of players, but ultimately it's Dante who makes sure that he gets to paradise without the counseling presence of Virgil. I know that was long-winded, but I hope that made sense.
It's helpful. Yeah, psychology is fascinating. It's quite helpful. I remember because C.S. Lewis actually has some interesting comments on psychology that you might like. I think it was in Mere Christianity, or maybe Miracles, one of the essay books that he wrote. And he was saying that psychology is an excellent tool for helping people, get out of the pit and back up to ground level. But what they do from there, you just never know. Like his example was, one could continue to take those steps forward and build his life and then become, upstanding citizen and a noble figure. And the other one could fall even further down into the pit that they just climbed themselves out of.
Exactly.
So to your point.
No, it's so true though. It's so true. And that's why the relationship, again, between the counselor and the therapist is an interesting one, because at the end of the day, right, we have the personal autonomy, and we're going to need to want to change. And if not, well, it doesn't necessarily matter it doesn't matter how many people we have in our corner, right? And again, as someone who works in that field, I'm sure you've seen a lot of examples of individuals who have people in their corner but are just unwilling to go up, to use Dante again, go up the ladder, go up the different rungs of a higher sense of reality. So no, it is sad.
Interesting.
But I am going to check that out. I'm going to definitely check out the symbolism of work, because that sounds very interesting.
He has some good guests on there. One was the recent one that I liked was CEO of a small company.
Okay.
That is motivating or inviting people, recruiting people to work for his company based on the transcendentals, truth, goodness, beauty, and saying everything that we do is going to be aligned with the truth. It's going to be good, and it's going to be beautiful. And so if that's what you want to do, then come join our company.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So it's kind of like creating a culture around those things. But I will say psychology is important too with writing, man, because you got to know people.
Yeah.
In order to know people, you got to know yourself. And so I'd have to say that, I don't know, my life has been totally out of order. Like, I think about it, it's kind of like how George Lucas came out with episode 4. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm kind of like this. Like, we'll do 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, and then all these other things. And it's like, we'll throw it in like a holiday special. But I'm kind of like that, where like I was a late bloomer, and then I had this like moment in the room. I was by myself in a room full of cadavers in an anatomy class. And I kind of had that like my first real encounter with death or my mortality. And that woke me up, and I was like, so that led me to have some really interesting journeys and experiences. And like I spent 2 years without a cell phone.
No way.
6 months living in Costa Rica, like totally off the grid.
Wow.
Living in a small sustainable farm, kind of going like spending part of my days with the local Tico Costa Rican farmers, and then at the other time with like new age Buddhist meditation retreats
Sure.
and everything else. It was like super high in openness, super explorative in every which way. But then I also traveled on bicycle during that time. Again, no phone, no, just like, so in a way I relate a lot to Mathieu Peugeot, who lives
Yeah,
off the grid in a yurt in Canada. But then I also relate a lot to Jonathan, right? That
yeah,
teacher in town. So I'm somewhere in between the two. I'm somewhere in between the two where like, well, I'll just say this. So I had that season where it was like very explorative, adventurous, had esoteric, mystical experiences,
sure.
explored psychedelics, explored spiritual practices, had visions, had encounters like you just would not believe, right?
Yeah,
And so it was almost like I was impacted by this incredible stretch, this extended season of kind of living in that like metaphysical
sure.
realm, the deeper than reason realm, I guess you could call it. Um, and so I mean, think of it. I was like kind of like riding a bicycle, just a few inches above the ground, and just kind of like floating from place to. That's how I live life, the spiritual realm too. Um,
How old were you?
I was 25
Love that. And were you married?
or 20. No, I mean, think about that. 23 to 25, right
Yeah.
around there. And so but I didn't know what to do with it. I always knew that I was supposed to write the story. Like
Yes.
we had one of the guy that traveled with us for a long time. He was the photographer. He had an eye for taking pictures. You compare his pictures to the ones that the other guys took, doesn't even compare. He just had something special about that.
Yeah, he saw the angles.
Yes, he saw the angles. He
He saw
did.
the
And so
patterns.
like we'll be in
That's
the
after.
same scene and we'll compare photos and it's like, oh my goodness, like his was
Yeah.
just way better. And the other guy that I traveled with, he just had the heart for the people. He connected with people just so much more immediately and more deeply than any of us could. And even back then, I knew that I was supposed to write the story. But then when I came home, you get caught up in this, that, and the other thing. You start a family, you kind
Yeah.
of take the day job, and then like you kind of come back down to the work world and the rational world.
Yeah.
Um, but then
Dude, I know it,
recently,
man. I know that.
yeah,
I and this is really good. I wasn't expecting this, but I love how this is really good. This is a good conversational. You said you were a conversationalist, so this is a good, conversational back and forth. But dude, no,
yeah.
I feel how authentic you are because and so it's funny. I just wanted to say, I wrote this down. Carl Rogers once said that the personal is the universal, and I just think that that's so damn
Hmm.
true because and that's very important for writing stories, right? And so, your personal, I was just thinking about how much that hit notes with me. Is yeah, you many times in life, man, you have these big ideas, or they might not even big ideas, but just aspirations, and you just don't necessarily know how to actualize them, how to materialize them. And then yeah, you get swamped down. I myself, I was a high school teacher for 5 years. I'm not going to say that held me down, but always wanted to pursue clinical stuff.
Oh,
And
that's my
yeah,
wife in the
see,
background.
they're ringing, man. So how about this?
Yeah.
How about
You could push pause and I could check with them. They might be shopping. They just need to drop off some groceries or something.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was a high school teacher for 5 years, and the work was fulfilling, but you just get ball. I mean, there's so many things that I wasn't able to do. For example, like this, like I can't have a conversation at 2:40 in the afternoon with someone that I think is an interesting thinker, right? And so, yeah, no, it's hard sometimes to, as you said, I think we were talking about this before, but even going back to like the whole intentionality piece that you brought up earlier, it's like you got to be you have to be intentional. And so often do we
Yeah.
get bogged down with just little trivial things. And that's not to say, work is not trivial, having a family is not trivial, but I know I experienced a lot of because work and because having a family is such difficult endeavors, right? I mean, being a husband, being a dad they're very hard things to do. And so you can get really complacent, and quite frankly, you can just get pretty lazy. And these goals and ambitions that you had, you said, oh, how do I tell that story? Well, when you already have so much on your plate, and then to ease that, you might indulge in less sophisticated things or less life-giving activities. You can distance yourself from those experiences, right? So you can distance yourself from those experiences.
Yeah.
So you can go, how the hell do I write this story? And I know that happened to me. And then, finally one day, this sounds so simplistic, but you do have to just go for it at some point. I was telling that to my wife. Like, I dabbled. I always was like, oh, I want to start a YouTube channel, whatever. And I thought, no, it's not time. It's not time. It's not time. I don't have anything to say. I don't have anything to do. And then one day I was just like, you know what, man, if you're not going to do it now, I don't know when you're going to do it. And I actually, it was,
if not now, then when?
And what propelled me to do that is I turned 30 in July, and I like to spend, I like to spend my birthdays having like a merry time. Don't get me wrong, but I like to spend some of it in like almost like silence and solace. And I was turning 30, so I was just like, lock the doors, shut off the lights. I got to contemplate what I'm doing in life.
Sounds great.
And part of it was just like, dude, you got to go for it. Like, you're gonna turn 30, so I'm gonna die soon, relatively speaking, right? I have this wife that supports and loves me, so I have her in my corner. I have this son who I just want him to be, I want him to be proud of, and I want him to look at his father's work and to say one day, oh, going back to mimetic desire, I want to be like dad, because dad uses his work for a good, right? And so you just got to do it at some point. Kicking and screaming, you got to just do it. You just got to upload you got to just press record, or you just got to take the Word doc out and just do it.
I mean, like, we use words like intentionality sometimes as replacements for words like discipline.
Yes.
You just need discipline. You just need to do the thing. I had a really good friend of mine. He's the artist David Flores, who's contributed to the blog as well. And he encouraged me one time, like, listen, for all the practicing and training you could do, like, take a baseball player, at some point you just got, it's time to come out of the batter's box, and you're due up in the order. You got to come to the plate, and it's time to swing. You can't just say, oh, sorry, I just need to work on my technique a little bit, or I just need to train. It's like, nope, just got to go with what you got and give it the best swing you have.
And it's so hard so it's so hard when you don't have those operations surrounding you that gives you a historical moment, or it gives you a very set time and they say go. So if I'm a baseball player, right, and I'm working on my swing, and it's spring training, and it's not looking too good. Oh, shit, it's mid-March, season's coming up. You get to early April, and it's not maybe in the space that the swing is not as sweet as you want it to be. But guess what? April 7th, it's opening day, and you have to perform, and you just got to go for it. And so I think what you just said it's perfect. It's like, you got to go for it. And what's hard for, people like us who aren't professional athletes is you have to set the date for the historical moment that you have to swing. No one else can set it for you. You have to set it. And especially when we're talking about starting a blog, or contributing to a blog, starting a podcast, having, stepping out of your comfort zone and having a conversation, and, in the, this little corner, whatever corner you occupy the internet, you have to set the opening day, And that's,
I mean, a good example of that is like Neil deGrasse, Durport Robbins. He's a heck of an artist. No one tells him when to set the premieres of his concept records, or his films. So he has to be the one to say, okay, it's going to come out then, and then work backwards. And they're like, okay, well, what does it take to to have everything ready and do the promotional stuff that's required.
Yes.
Make sure that you're a good host, so to speak, and
Yes.
then so by the time that premiere comes out, then it's ready to go. But there a lot of not everybody cares to embark in that. Other people like getting orders and executing them,
Sure.
and then other people like being creative and coming up with the orders, and it's like we work together in that respect. But I definitely feel like I'm well, okay. So one thing about this network or this corner of the internet is that it looks very different than it did 4 years ago. Where aside from Jonathan and like maybe like the Storytellers YouTube channel, there wasn't a whole lot of people with this worldview coming out with video essays,
Sure.
critiquing film
Yeah.
or trying to do a review for a movie. And so I did a little bit of that and kind of dabbled and experimented. But now there's a lot, and they're
Yeah.
doing like really good video essays. But then there's also like the conversation piece, and it's like, okay, back in the day it was like Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Peugeot and like a couple others, interviewing other people. Now there's a bunch, and it's great, and it feels like that space is being filled. To where if I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, of course I can post conversations, I can podcast, I can write symbolic interpretations of film and other things. But is it the thing?
Yeah.
Like, what's the main thing? What are the talents that you have received? What are the experiences that you've lived? A lot of these things, they're not self-generated, like you receive a lot of these things. And so it's like, I wrote a letter. I write letters to progeny. So like you mentioned, being a good example. So a lot of what motivates me is future generations, my kids, but then also to patrons, people that have some type of interest or value my work. And so I write these letters, and one of them was called "Know Your Seeds," or "Garden Your Ideas," where it's like I look at it like this. Some people like they try to like approach things like a genre, like I'm going to sit down and write a sci-fi dystopian, graphic novel. And it's like, well, okay, I just don't work like that.
Sure.
So I start seeing things in the world, experiences, listen to things. As I observe, they just come together. Meaning comes together in an understandable way through a dystopian sci-fi graphic novel or a trilogy for a concept record, or it comes in like the mystical memoir, which I'll be writing this year.
Hey.
And
Okay.
so these are the things that like they come in seed form for me.
Sure.
So like I receive these ideas, and then it's like, well, what do I need to do to 10? I've only read like 2 memoirs in my life.
Yeah.
So like I don't even like, how do I go about writing it? And so now it informs me of what I had to learn in order to bring it forth. Just like a gardener gets squash seeds and is like, well, those are very different than getting carrot seeds.
Yes.
How you tend to it is very differently. So when it comes to this realm, it's like I started getting that conviction of like, there's people doing the video essay thing, there's people doing the conversation thing, but who's going to write these stories? And it finally hit me as like, oh, no one else.
Yeah.
I finally found, I've narrowed it down to those things that absolutely no one else can do, and I have to do these things. And so I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, but that's what I'm endeavoring to do.
I love that. And you're right. Someone has to write these stories, because it would almost be, for as much as, this community talks about a symbolic world, just to put it frank, and a patterned reality, it's almost like you're not actualizing the actual project unless you are writing stories, so that these concepts that might not be digestible for some. And I say that because, with the long form conversations and the podcasts and, even a little bit of what I've done so far on my channel, I understand that it might be a little bit in the realm of heavy philosophical discourse. And I don't think I don't think my channel is I don't think we've only done that, but I've had some conversations so far with, I've talked with Zevi Slavin, sorry, who works at Seekers of Unity, so he's really big into the perennialism and mysticism, and talked to a couple authors, talked to Kel Zeldin. It operates in the philosophical, right? But not everyone, that's the tough thing. And I think that's why some people are reluctant to go full into this community, is because it does operate a lot on the philosophical. And so if you don't have that pre-existing knowledge, if you haven't read Socrates, if you haven't maybe read the ancients, if you are not, skilled in, well, not even skilled, if you have not necessarily read a lot of theology, if you have not read a lot of continental philosophy, it might be difficult to approach this community. And so like for me, like the only reason why I think I invested so much in this community is because, I luckily do have that background, right? Like, art history, religious studies major in undergrad, have an MA in systematic theology. So it's a little more approachable for me, but it's not for a lot. And so what I'm trying to say here is that we need the storytellers, because it's the stories. It's not always the philosophical, it's the stories, right? It's the myths. It's that truly connects with the people.
Yeah. I mean, why is that? It's because you can take like 300 hours worth of conversations and tell a 3-minute story.
Exactly.
You can kind of condense all of these things in a way that you just can't in a conversational manner. So I'm still encouraged to keep up the conversations. I might not be able to publish with the same frequency I have in the past.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not going to abandon it, because I think something that Nicholas Kotar said, the fantasy author, he
I've read what's the one book I actually picked up? Song of Siren, the first
one.
one.
Yeah.
That's really good. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. So he's doing that at the fantasy fiction realm in fairy tales. But he was saying, it's like, nowadays it's not just good enough to just do the story. You also have to train your readers and the worldview to properly understand the story.
Yeah.
And so I feel encouraged. I mean, like the feedback after the Mathieu interview too is like, it's important to continue to grow as a conversationalist, as an interviewer, because that keeps things going in a certain way too. You can kind of get into that nitty gritty. It draws out ideas in me talking about it with people than me sitting down trying to write about it.
Yeah.
It draws out ideas from two totally different banks for some reason. That's just how it works. So I'm encouraged to keep conversations like these going. But then also the essays, there is a special point that's part of that training. So it's like you could take like a Star Wars movie, or like in my case, I really like the Arrival movie. You could take that and pull out certain things and use some of these other things to train and say, like, look at this, see these patterns, see the dystopian pattern. Can you see the apocalyptic pattern? Can you see these tropes? So it's like kind of like that heart of a teacher. And I've had years teaching as well. I do enjoy it. But I think it's really important for people to find what's the main thing, like what's that center circle, and then the secondary, tertiary, like the other things that support it. Other people will use planet analogy, like what's the sun for the heliocentric example? What's the sun? What's the main thing? And then what are the planets that kind of orbit and support around it?
I love it. I feel inspired right now, because I love what you said. It's like you need both. And I forget who you just stated who said that, whose idea that was, but that we need both. We need Kotar, right?
Nicholas Kotar encouraged me.
Train the reader. And yes, I think things like this, like, maybe if my channel picks up and, relative to when it started, I think it's doing okay. But yeah, like you hearing the conversations, getting that aspect of it, but then also having that drilled in by reading a good story that gives you goosebumps, or that just asserts meaning on you, and you feel really jazzed about that. Derek, I'm so sorry because I feel like we got going. I feel like this is a very good conversation. But on my end, I do have to end, and I will say that
time to go.
I would love to have a part 2 conversation with you, because this was really fun. This was really fun, and I didn't necessarily have a direction for this conversation to go, but something carried it, and I think it was just a really good discussion with you.
I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
I hope all of the listeners did too. Yeah, I'm open for having another discussion down the road.
It'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone. Again, Derek, thank you so much, and you have a great day. Have a safe drive home.
Okay, everybody subscribe to the channel, like it, Just with Joe. More great content like this.
Oh, I appreciate that. And like I said, I'm going to put both Derek's Substack and his channel in the comments below. But please, if you subscribe to this channel, please do me a favor, subscribe. Even if you don't subscribe to this channel and you just watch this channel, subscribe to both of Derek's platforms, Substack and his own YouTube channel. I subscribe to his newsletter, so I'm keeping up in the know, and I encourage you to do that as well. So Derek, thank you so much, and I will be talking to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Take care.